And the mill wheels turn, though the night is still, and the elf lights flash from the ruined mill. He haunts the station, he haunts the hill, and the land that lies between. Well, don't zoom out, you've ruined it now. Hello and welcome back to Buggleskelly Station. If you know the Will Hay classic Oh Mr Porter, you will know about One-Eyed Joe's Cock-Eyed Mill, the supposedly abandoned windmill from the film's third act. It's one of the film's best visual gags. We see Porter, Albert and Harbottle climbing out onto the sails of the windmill to try and escape the gun runners who've locked them inside. It's such a good gag that it was actually copied by the Dad's Army writers for the 1970 Dad's Army episode Don't Forget the Diver, and the dreadful mess that was Thomas and the Tragic Fail Road. And the Reverend Audrey was in his grave, going round and round and round. So, Buggleskelly Windmill is my latest diorama. It's in N gauge, N scale, 1 to 148. It's the first time I've properly modelled in N. The only thing I've ever built in N was actually our wedding cake, which featured Thomas, obviously. So here's my diorama and how I built it. The windmill scene in Oh Mr Porter was filmed at Turling Windmill in Essex, which is thankfully still standing. It's a listed building. Although it has changed a lot since the 1930s, it's now £1 million home. In fact, until a decade ago, it was owned by the prodigies Leroy Thornhill. The film used a model for the wide shots, which is what I've decided to base my model on. I built the structure in Tinkercad, using reference photos from the film and several good black and white images taken in the 1930s, 40s and 50s. Modern day photos were useful too, especially for the cap and the fantail, which are hard to see in the older photos. But as the mill was converted into a home, most of the windows and doors changed position. The wood cladding was even changed completely, so it wasn't really much help. All of the dimensions are listed in Essex Windmills, Millers and Millwrights by Kenneth G. Farries, so I was able to scale these down. I actually model everything in 00 gauge or 1 to 76 scale and then convert it to N scale. But this way I know that I'm getting the dimensions right. My dad, Nick Marshall, also wrote and illustrated a book on windmills, which did come in useful for designing the wind shaft and the working parts. What do you think of it? Shit. Yeah, thanks. If you're a windmill expert, I'm sure you'll tell me there's something wrong as well, but I'm happy with the look of it, and you know my view on rivet counters.
You're wasting your time!
Once I was happy with the design, I resin printed all of the parts using the Anycubic Photon X2. This has turned out to be the largest single building I've produced to date, and it's made up of 8 sections. Once they were printed, I washed the parts in isopropyl alcohol and cured them in my UV curing chamber. In order to test the prints would work in different scales, I printed a 00 scale model as well as the N scale model I'm using in the diorama, so you might see me jump between the two as I painted them both at the same time. I first primed the sections with a brown base coat using Humbrol Matte Dark Earth. I wanted the sails to look weather beaten, so I sprayed a light coat of Humbrol White over the brown sails. Once dry, I brushed with some more dark earth over parts of the white, and then without letting it fully dry, and even using the same brush, I'd go over it again with white, picking out certain sections of wood, making the worn paintwork less uniform, and with a finer brush I pick out individual struts and planks as if some have been replaced over time. The main tower sections are spray painted in Humbrol black, and then I dry brushed the same dark earth colour over the top, highlighting the edge of the woodwork and the other features. Some planks were picked out to look as though they'd been replaced or worn away, and then I picked out the windows and doors in white and dry brushed the same brown colour lightly over the top. The brickwork is Vallejo rust. I painted the base of the cap white and spray painted the cap itself. I allowed some of the brown undercoat to show through. This was again dry brushed in brown. With a smaller brush, I picked out the finer details in brown paint. You can see here that spraying the white from only certain angles created a nice weathered wood effect on the cap. The windmill's powered by a 3-volt DC motor, which runs at 7 RPM, which I think is a realistic windmill speed. It can be powered by 2 AA batteries, or wired into a model railway system if a resistor is added. For this diorama, I've attached it to a battery pack. Because I wanted to recreate the scene in the diorama, I had to include the old boarded up tunnel where the gun runners hide their train. Again, I modelled this in both 00 and N, and it's based on screenshots from the film. The piece was primed with grey primer, and the woodwork was painted using the same method as the windmill, with a mixture of dry brushing in dark earth brown and white. I gave the stonework a base colour of Humbrol khaki drill matte, being careful not to go over the already painted woodwork. I began picking out individual blocks using Humbrol dark earth, Vallejo orange brown and Humbrol light grey. Obviously you can use any mixture of colours, and don't worry if it looks a bit like a cartoon at this stage, because there's magic that will bring it all together. Next, I mixed the khaki drill matte with white to create a lighter tone, and made sure to get rid of most of it on some kitchen roll, and then I dry brushed all the stonework. This really tones down the bright colours, and it highlights the texture in the stonework. The next step's very subtle, but I think it's worth it. I lightly dry brush some white down the whole piece from top to bottom, which highlights where light would naturally hit the stonework. And then the vital step is to cover the entire thing in a black wash, which creates shadows and gives the model some much needed depth. I make my washes approximately 1 part paint to 10 parts water, but you may need to experiment on some scrap plastic first, because this is the step that can ruin everything if you add too much black.
Black for the sky and the sea, black, all black, like the procession of night that leads us into the valley of despair.
It's a good idea at this stage to paint any surrounding walls or natural stones, because I wanted it to look like the tunnel had been built into the existing landscape using local stones. So while I had the paints mixed, I used the same colours on some plaster cast rocks, which are made using Woodland Scenic's rock moulds. And again, these had a black wash to tie everything together. I designed the characters of Porter, Albert and Harbottle last year using the animation software Blender. I needed them hanging off the windmill's sail, so I modelled them in various crouched and hanging positions. These were then resin printed and cured before painting. I go into figure painting a bit more in detail in my building Buggleskelly station video, so I won't waste your time here too much, but it's just a case of using a tiny brush and a steady hand. The skin's painted first using Vallejo flat flesh, and then the white shirts are added in Vallejo off-white. Porter's hair is dark earth, as is Harbottle's hat, and the SRNI uniforms are black. I printed off this wooden cart, scaled it down to 1:148 scale, painted it brown and dry brushed with white, and then I added some faded grass clumps from Primo models to represent haystacks, which I later trimmed down to a bit better suit end scale. All of my dioramas begin with a 3mm ply baseboard. I'd usually add some bracing underneath, but because I needed this diorama to fit into a box for displaying at shows, I didn't want to add any additional height. Because of this, I've made the hillside structures as light as possible using cardboard. Now these card sheets are packaging from IKEA furniture, and they're really useful for landscaping in a strong but lightweight way. I glued some end scale track into place. There isn't actually a siding in the film, but I wanted somewhere to display my end scale Buggleskelly wagon, so I used some artistic license to add one here. I temporarily placed the tunnel mouth and the walls against the cardboard, and I used pieces of mountain board card to build up the embankment and the edges of the diorama. I drew around the base of the windmill onto some mounting board card, and I cut a template out to make embedding the windmill easier later. There's also a hidden cave at the back to house the battery pack for the windmill motor. Next came the messy part. Sculptor mould is a plaster and paper mix which sets rock hard when mixed with water. I bought it in bulk a couple of years ago when it was £12 a bag. Look today and I can struggle to find it for under £30, so there must be a worldwide shortage of plaster and shredded paper. There are recipes online to make your own, which I'll probably have to do in the future. I then covered the hillside in this mixture. I glued the tunnel mouth into place using wood glue, and I glued the rocks in place too. The buffer stop is made by Pico, and I painted it in the same method as the windmill and the tunnel door. "24 hours later, the sculptor mould had almost set, so I painted it with a burnt umber acrylic paint. I was kindly sent some new scatter material by Tom's Modelling Corner. I'll leave a link in the YouTube description to his eBay shop. It's a very fine scatter, which made it ideal as a base material for end scale. I've made good use of the green and brown in patches across the hillside, gluing it down with Mod Podge matte. The tube you can see is to guide the wires from the windmill down into the hillside. I also have a vast collection of scenic materials, from Woodland Scenics, Primo models, Deluxe Materials, Tremendous, Jarvis, Pico, War Painter, World War Scenics, probably a few others there as well. I scattered some Tremendous leaves randomly onto the hillside to add a bit of colour variation into the scatter. I wanted the back part of the diorama to look like a hayfield that's been left to run wild. I began by adding Mod Podge matte in places and then scattered on some Jarvis sand scatter, which added a yellow tone. I covered this with brown scatter. I cut up some 2mm pieces of plumber's hemp and used a static grass applicator to apply it over the top of the fields. I also added some larger clumps by hand. For shrubs and bushes, I use Woodland Scenic's coarse turf in patches, and then with Mod Podge I applied a mixture of pico-static grasses. The beauty of working on such a small diorama is you can just tip any excess off after each layer and use it again, and make a real mess in your office. For some variation, I added these War Painter grass clumps, which look just like bushes in N scale, and some Woodland Scenic's underbrush. I added some Primo Models grass tufts in random locations, which I trimmed down better for the scale. It was then time to ballast the track. I find most ballast is way out of scale, so I usually use N-scale ballast for my 00 dioramas, but this looked far too big for N-scale, so thankfully Tom's Modelling Corner, Tom had included a grey scatter, which was fine enough to work nicely as N-scale ballast. Using a soft brush and a teaspoon, I got the ballast where I wanted it, and then I sprayed isopropyl alcohol and added the glue mixture. This is 50-50 Mod Podge matte and water, with a drop of washing up liquid to break the surface tension. This was then allowed to dry for at least 24 hours. I then also sprayed the scenery with IPA at this stage, and I added scenic cement to hold all the loose scenery in place. Once the glue had dried, I threaded the windmill wires through the plastic tube and glued the base in place. I used random clump foliage and scatters to hide the join. This was glued in place using scenic cement. Next to the windmill is an old pond, which I'd previously added at the sculptor mould stage. I painted the base with a light brown to represent mud, and I added Deluxe Materials Aqua Magic while the paint was still wet. I stirred it in with the paint to tint the water. Aqua Magic takes about 24 hours to set. Finally, I added the hay cart with a spot of glue and painted the sides of the diorama with black paint to finish everything off. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you for watching. Before I leave you with some close-up shots of the finished diorama, I'd like to let you know, if you're watching this the day it goes out, we'll actually be taking this to the NEC in Birmingham this weekend, the 27th to 28th of April, for Model World Live. You can find us at Buggleskelly Station Stand C7, and you can also order the new windmill, the new tunnel mouth and the figures, and we've got a new SR&I open wagon coming soon as well. They're all available at buggleskellystation.com. Just please be aware that any printed items can take 6 to 8 weeks to produce, and they obviously do take quite a while to do, especially if they're hand painted. If you like the video, please give it a like and share. Consider subscribing. I post every 2 years at the minute. No, I do try and post some videos when I can. And I'll leave you with some detailed shots of the new diorama for One-Eyed Joe's Cock-Eyed Mill. Thanks for watching.
And every night when the moon gives light, the ghost of Miller is seen as he walks the track with a sack on his back down to the Black Warheen. Oh, Buggleskelly, a place I knew so well, with a toothless fool and a chubby youth and a pompous so-and-so, and a pompous so-and-so. And the mill wheels turn though the night is still, and the elf lights flash from the ruined mill. He haunts the station, he haunts the hill, and the land that lies between. Oh, Buggleskelly, a place I knew so well, with a toothless fool and a chubby youth, and a pompous so-and-so, and a pompous so-and-so.